Welcome to Pseudobiblia. If you enjoy audio stories, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to our channel so you don't miss our weekly releases. Now, Pseudobiblia presents A Genovese for Four Hands. This work is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and events are the product of the author's imagination or used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, events, or places, existing or having existed, is purely coincidental. Enjoy listening. A Genovese for Four Hands. A novel written by Camillina Gentili. Chapter 1. The Beginning of the Challenge. The sun was bidding farewell to Lake Maggiore. Its rays painted the sky with broad strokes of gold and blood orange. Erice, Severino Roussier's restaurant, stood like a bastion of discreet elegance on its shores in Verbania. The large windows reflected the serene majesty of the lakeside landscape. Inside, a sophisticated warmth enveloped guests, a safe harbor for those seeking a culinary experience that bordered on perfection. Severino, chef and patron, moved between the tables. His precision was almost choreographic, that of someone who had dedicated his life to a demanding art. Every detail was under his meticulous control. His dishes, born from a delicate balance between deeply felt tradition and thoughtful innovation, were the fulcrum of his existence. His kitchen, a laboratory of pristine steel and copper geometries, was a sanctuary. There, creativity was disciplined by rigor. The freshest ingredients, chosen with obsessive care. The hunchbacked cardoons from Nizza Monferrato, carnaroli rice from Baraggia, fish just caught from the lake waters, were transformed into harmonic compositions, edible narratives. Every evening, Erice welcomed a refined clientele, eager for those palatial experiences. But for Severino, true fulfillment lay in the constant tension toward an unreachable ideal of perfection. His philosophy was founded on masterful technique and an inflexible work ethic. It was the legacy of formative years spent in the starred kitchens of Lyon and Paris. Every dish is a story, he loved to repeat to his brigade, a journey that begins with the raw material and is completed in the customer's emotion. His tone was measured, but brooked no argument. That evening, however, while the noble aroma of risotto with white Alba truffle spread like a promise through the dining room, Severino could not foresee the rogue wave preparing to shake his so orderly universe. Meanwhile, hundreds of kilometers away, in the vibrant heart of Naples, Ludovica Esposito was orchestrating the colorful and fragrant disorder of her small kitchen. It was the prelude to her imminent social media livestream. That environment, a riot of exotic spices, mismatched utensils, and Vietri ceramics, was a faithful mirror of her effervescent personality. Today, the theme was her celebrated Genovese del Vesuvio. It was her personal and bold reinterpretation of the classic Erice dessert, which merged the Neapolitan soul with a marked curiosity for the new. While the stand mixer whipped velvety pastry cream, and her hands expertly rolled out pastry dough scented with Sorrento lemons, her enthusiasm was an electric current. For Ludovica, cooking was pure expression, a universal language to tell her story and the culture she came from. "Ciao, treasures. Welcome back to my little kingdom of delights," she began, with a dazzling smile toward her smartphone's camera. The screen was already flooded with greetings from her followers. "Today we're making together a bomb of sweetness that will make you dream. My Genovese del Vesuvio. I took the recipe we all love, the one from the nuns of Erice, and made it a bit my own, with a little secret I'll reveal later." Her hands, jeweled with colorful rings, moved quickly and confidently. Every word oozed genuine love for the art of cooking. Having completed the preparation, with a tuft of cream still on her lips after the ritual tasting, she exclaimed voluptuously, "Mamma mia, guys, this is pure poetry. Try it to believe it." Her passion was authentic, and her channel Ludo in Cuisine garnered consensus. A comment from @foodie lover 89 struck her. Ludo, you're a marvel. But have you ever tried the real ones from L'Essenza by Severino Roussier on Lake Maggiore? They say it's the temple of tradition. Wonder what you'd think. It would be an amazing collaboration. The idea buzzed in her head. A few days later, returning from an event in Milan, she decided on a detour. The experience at L'Essenza, however, didn't enthuse her as she had hoped. Seated at her laptop, her fingers flew across the keyboard. The review took shape with a frankness that was her trademark. L'Essenza, when the temple of tradition becomes a golden cage. I crossed the threshold of L'Essenza with mouth watering and the curiosity of someone expecting a journey into the noblest roots of Italian cuisine, guided by a multi-award-winning chef. Severino Roussier serves dishes that are monuments to technique, true exercises in style. On this, nothing to object. But I wonder, where has the soul gone? Each course is a museum artwork, magnificent to observe, but imbued with an almost reverential coldness. That millimetric precision, so praised by critics. To me, it seemed a rigidity that suffocates the vital pulse of the ingredient. Don't misunderstand me, Chef Roussier is a master. But in an era when cuisine aspires to dialogue with the deepest emotions, L'Essenza seems to conduct a self-referential monologue. Respect for tradition? Absolutely. But tradition to live must be lifeblood, a root from which new flowers sprout, not a mausoleum to polish. An experience that satisfies the intellect, less so the heart. Rating: 7/10, technique scores 9, but overall emotion doesn't exceed 6. The publication unleashed an uproar. Her followers immediately divided. On one side, traditionalist purists accused her of lèse-majesty. On the other, supporters of freer, more emotional cuisine. Severino, warned by his maître d' of unusual ferment online, read the review. Initial incredulity soon transformed into a cold rage that gripped his stomach. He, who considered each dish a declaration of love toward the material and history, felt defiled. His reputation, built with years of sacrifice, had been pilloried by a girl who plays with food on the internet. Within hours, the hashtag Genovese Gate began trending. It was fueled by vitriolic comments, ironic memes, and parody videos. These staged the duel between the serious chef from the north and the irreverent blogger from the south. Marco Ferretti, cunning television producer of MasterChef and other successful culinary programs, immediately smelled blood. And above all, ratings. He urgently convened his creative team. This is pure dynamite, guys. We have a clash of titans, tradition versus irreverence. We need to ride the wave. I want a primetime challenge. Genovese, the origin of flavor. Severino, though initially disgusted by the idea of spectacularizing his art, felt wounded pride mount. That pride pushed him to consider the proposal. It was an opportunity, perhaps the only one, to re-establish truth, his truth. Ludovica, galvanized by the clamor and secretly flattered by so much attention, saw the challenge as the definitive launching pad for her career and for her philosophy of living and fearless cuisine. Both were determined, both convinced of their reasons. The conflict, born from a dessert and a review, was about to transform into an epic battle for the soul of Italian cuisine. News of the television challenge further inflamed spirits. It transformed Severino and Ludovica into icons of two opposing worlds. On the day of the event, set up in a sumptuous villa overlooking the deep blue of Lake Como, tension was an almost palpable ingredient. Severino, in his immaculate regulation white, mentally reviewed every step of his Genovese. It was the one inherited from his grandmother, a treasure chest of secrets and memories. Ludovica, energetic and colorful in her personalized apron, checked her station. She was ready to amaze with her audacious reinterpretation. I never would have believed I'd have to defend my cuisine in a media arena, Severino mused. The blade of his santoku caressed a bourbon vanilla pod with millimetric precision. His breathing was controlled, but a slight tremor in his hands betrayed his internal agitation. My work should speak for itself. But pride, that untamable beast, pushed him to pick up the gauntlet. The challenge went on air. It was a succession of high-tension moments, sarcastic remarks, and pure culinary magic. Severino presented a Genovese of canonical perfection, a triumph of balance and classic flavors. Ludovica replied with a surprising creation, which dared unprecedented combinations while maintaining a link to the original inspiration. The jury's verdict, composed of 3-starred chefs and a feared gastronomic critic, was awaited with bated breath. And when it was pronounced, the audience in the studio and at home exploded. But for Severino and Ludovica, beyond the result, an awareness crept in. That dessert, the Genovese, had become the symbol of something much larger. A battleground, certainly, but perhaps, unexpectedly, also a possible meeting point. And as the studio lights dimmed, both felt that their story, intertwined with the fragrance of that delicate cream, was far from over. Chapter 2. The Bitter Taste of Genovese Gate. The following morning, Verbania woke under a clear sky. For Severino Roussier, however, the air was heavy. The windows of Erice reflected a placid Lake Maggiore, almost indifferent to the turmoil agitating the chef's soul. In the kitchen, usually a hive of orderly and whispered activity, an unusual tension reigned. Paolo, his trusted sous chef, a young man who venerated Severino like a master, approached him with circumspection. He held a tablet tightly in his hands. "Chef, you should take a look. Social media has gone crazy after yesterday's show." Severino, who had spent an almost sleepless night reliving every moment of the challenge, nodded with a tired gesture. He took the tablet and began scrolling. Ludovica's review, now amplified by television resonance, was just the tip of the iceberg. Genovese Gate had become a true digital battlefield. Finally, someone with the courage to say that tradition isn't a fossil. "Great Ludo, Team Ludovica," wrote one user, followed by dozens of hearts. "Are we kidding? Roussier is a monument of Italian cuisine. This girl should go back to frying pizzelle." "Io sto con Severino," another retorted, with equal vehemence. He saw photo montages of himself with an 18th-century wig and the title, "The Last of the Pastry Mohicans." There were also parody videos of Ludovica throwing Genovese like frisbees. What stung him deepest, however, was a comment under a post that defined him as a good technician, but without a trace of heart. Blood rushed to his temples. Without heart, rigidity, those words were like shards. For him, technique was the language through which he expressed his passion. Rigor was the highest form of respect toward ingredients and toward those who had transmitted that art to him. How could that Neapolitan influencer, with her vulgar ways and her watered-down cuisine, arrogate the right to diminish 20 years of absolute dedication? His stomach contracted. That evening, service at Erice was an ordeal. The waiters moved guardedly, almost on tiptoe. Severino noticed furtive glances, customers whispering and pointing at their smartphones. For the first time in years, he felt exposed, his skin naked under the merciless spotlights of others' judgment. He sent back a sauce for not being perfectly smooth, a detail he would have corrected calmly at another time. Now, that small defect seemed like another crack in his armor of perfection. He, who never made gross errors, found himself reprimanding a young commis for an imperceptibly irregular vegetable cut. The boy paled. "I can't let this mud bury me," he told himself, as anger transformed into cold, sharp determination. "I must regain control of the narrative." The idea of a social media livestream repulsed him. He belonged to the stoves, to the concentrated silence of creation, not to the media circus. But he saw no other choice. The next day, with Paolo's awkward help, he set up a small set in his study. It was a sober corner, with a bookshelf of gastronomic texts behind him. "Good evening," he began. His voice was slightly uncertain at first. His eyes, fixed on the phone's lens, betrayed a mix of wounded pride and reluctance. "I don't usually rely on these tools to communicate, but recent events force me to clarify." The viewer counter began to rise vertiginously. "I have read and listened carefully to Miss Esposito's words and the comments that followed," he continued. He gradually regained his usual authority. "I respect every opinion, of course, but I believe there's a substantial difference between constructive criticism, even severe, and a certain superficiality in judging complex work like that of author Cuisine." Thousands of comments began flooding the chat. "Go chef," alternated with, "You're just an arrogant old man." "Cuisine, you see," his voice became warmer, almost passionate, "is not a game to entertain followers. It's not a passing fad. It's art. It's living history. It's deep respect for raw materials and for the generations of artisans who preceded us. When I prepare a risotto alla Milanese or my Genovese, I'm not simply assembling ingredients. I'm officiating a rite. I'm honoring a memory." He allowed himself a pause. His gaze was intense. "Miss Esposito speaks of rigidity. I call it coherence, respect for the product. There's a fine difference between innovation and anarchy, between creativity and simple confusion. Tradition isn't a chain. It's a deep root that nourishes the tree. Without roots, the tree falls at the first gust of wind." Ludovica, warned by a storm of notifications, tuned into the live stream just in time to hear Severino's conclusion. True cuisine, that which aspires to leave a mark, isn't improvised with a 10-minute tutorial. It's studied, lived, suffered. And above all, it deserves respect, not easy judgments. Without a moment's hesitation, Ludovica's fingers flew across her phone's keyboard. Her comment appeared in large letters among the others. "Mr. Roussier, with all due respect, if your cuisine were really so alive and speaking, you wouldn't feel the need to act as its defense attorney in a social media livestream. Great dishes, like great stories, tell themselves, and they don't fear the future. We'll catch up soon, maybe in front of a real Genovese." Winking face, Genovese Gate continues. Genovese Gate, already viral, definitively exploded that evening. A well-known culinary meme creator published an animated video. It showed a Severino in medieval armor defending a pastry castle from the assault of a Ludovica armed with a cream-firing pastry bag. The title, Genovese Wars. The Empire of Tradition Strikes Back, or Not. Marco Ferretti, the producer, was gloating in his office. The challenge's ratings had been stratospheric. Now, this back and forth further fueled interest. "We need to strike while the iron's hot," he told his team. "I've talked to the sponsors. They're ready to finance a longer program, a sort of journey challenge. We'll send them to Sicily, searching for the origins of the Genovese. Imagine the dynamics. Him, the purist, her, the heretic, forced to collaborate. Meanwhile, in an elegant Milanese office, Giulia Martini, editorial director of a prestigious publishing house specializing in gastronomy, was evaluating the situation with a clinical eye. She had followed the affair from the beginning. The virality was interesting, but she saw something deeper. The story of two souls, two Italies, of a dessert that became metaphor. "This isn't just gossip," she murmured, picking up the phone. "It's material for a powerful book. I must speak with both, separately for now." Chapter 3. The Challenge Served. The morning sun filtered through the large windows of L'essenza. It drew light geometries on the polished floor. Marco Ferretti, with his casual manner of a showman, crossed the restaurant's threshold. Severino received him with cold courtesy in his private study. It was a sober environment, dominated by a massive walnut desk and shelves filled with ancient recipe books. "Chef Roussier, thank you for receiving me," Ferretti began, settling down without waiting for a formal invitation. I'll go straight to the point. Your controversy with Miss Esposito is on everyone's lips. A media phenomenon. Severino fixed his gaze on him. His expression was inscrutable. If you're here to propose another television circus, I fear you're wasting your time, Mr. Ferretti. Not at all, chef. Or rather, not only. Marco Ferretti flashed a charming smile and a tablet. On it scrolled graphs and interaction percentages. Look here. Genovese Gate has generated millions of interactions. The public is fascinated, divided, passionate. What I'm proposing is a unique opportunity. Transform this clash into a story, an event series. Severino raised an eyebrow. A story. Exactly. A journey to the origins of the Genovese. You and Ludovica Esposito in Sicily, in Erice. You'll meet the tradition's custodians. You'll explore the secrets of that dessert. And naturally, there will be tests, creative challenges. But the heart of the program will be your confrontation, your evolution. Severino remained silent for a long moment, weighing the words. The idea of a trip to Erice, to the roots of that dessert linked to faded memories of his grandmother, touched him. It touched him more than he wanted to admit, but the idea of doing it under spotlights next to that woman, it caused a tightness in his stomach. And why should I accept? He asked, his voice neutral. Because it's the chance to demonstrate, without filters, the authentic value of your cuisine, your philosophy. And because, let's not hide it, chef, even a restaurant like yours can benefit from such powerful storytelling. Ferretti added, with a more confidential tone. Additionally, a significant portion of the proceeds will go to an association for the protection of Sicilian typical products, a culturally significant operation. While Severino reflected, torn between his innate reserve and pride that demanded a more articulated revenge. In Naples, Ludovica welcomed the same proposal with uncontainable enthusiasm. But it's incredible. I mean, me and the Prince of Snow in Sicily making Genovese. Live nationally. Treasures, prepare the popcorn because we'll see some great things, she exclaimed during a video call with her small team of collaborators. Her eyes sparkled. The idea of her own program, of reaching an even wider audience, electrified her. And there's more, Ferretti had explained to her. Giulia Martini, editorial director of Food-Art Editions, is very interested in drawing a book from this adventure of yours. A book that isn't just a recipe collection, but the story of your encounter clash. Giulia Martini, indeed, had acted skillfully. She had contacted both separately. To Severino, she had proposed a prestigious volume, a culinary essay that could explore the delicate balance between conservation and progress, enhanced by his personal story and the rediscovery of his roots. To Ludovica, she had offered the possibility of a fresh, dynamic book, a book that could consecrate her as an authoritative voice of culinary innovation, yet capable of dialoguing with history. Both, though for different reasons, had felt that editorial proposal could give deeper meaning to television spectacularization. The day of the first field challenge, prelude to the Sicilian journey, arrived in a flash. The chosen location was Villa San Martino in Arona, a neoclassical jewel overlooking Lake Maggiore. An imposing transparent tent set up in the Italian gardens housed two identical professional kitchens, separated by a symbolic balustrade. Severino arrived with his usual manner, descending from a dark sedan. He was impeccable in his white uniform with the L'essenza logo finely embroidered. His gaze was concentrated, almost austere. Soon after, a colorful van with Ludo in Cucina Chaos and Love Tour, written on it, parked with a cheerful maneuver. Ludovica emerged, energetic as always, in a personalized fuchsia apron. She was followed by her young assistant carrying baskets of Amalfi lemons and Brant pistachios. Meeting in front of the tent entrance, an exchange of remarks was inevitable. "So, Professor," Ludovica began with a cheeky smile, "ready for a fun cooking lesson. Elegance, Miss Esposito, manifests in substance, not in effervescence," Severino replied, impassive, but an almost imperceptible flash crossed his eyes. The audience was select: renowned gastronomic critics, curious-starred chefs, influencers with millions of followers, and journalists from major publications, all ready to witness the year's first real confrontation round. Marco Ferretti, seasoned showman, took the stage set up in the center. "Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Genovese, the origin of flavor. Today you won't witness a simple cooking competition, but a true dialogue between two worlds, two philosophies, two souls of our extraordinary gastronomy." He enthusiastically presented the jury. Three sacred monsters of contemporary Italian cuisine, the director of a glossy industry magazine, and in video connection from Erice, the iconic Maria Grammatico. Her pastry shop was a temple for lovers of authentic Genovese. Her virtual presence added a weight of almost sacred authority to the event. "The rules are clear," Ferretti announced. 2 hours' time, basic Genovese ingredients will be provided, but our chefs can supplement with a small selection of secret products brought from home. The theme is the Genovese, obviously, but interpreted according to one's vision. May creativity and passion prevail. At the start, the two kitchens came alive in diametrically opposite ways. Severino moved with precise, almost ritual gestures. He selected each ingredient with meticulous care. His station was a model of order. He spoke little, immersed in absolute concentration. His eyes were fixed on his stand mixer, beginning to work an ivory-colored shortbread. Ludovica, instead, was a whirlwind of energy. She chatted with mobile cameras. She tasted her pastry cream with her fingertip. She adjusted a pinch of lemon zest. She changed her mind about a decoration, all seasoned with laughter and jokes for the studio audience and her followers connected live. "I'm preparing Genovese like my grandmother Concetta made them," Severino explained to an operator who had approached discreetly. "Traditional shortbread, with lard as was once used for unmatched friability. Classic pastry cream, scented only with bourbon vanilla and a veil of lemon. Absolute respect for a dessert that is history." He described his pastry, thin, which should melt in the mouth, and the cream, not too sweet to bring out the quality of milk and eggs. "And I, friends," Ludovica replied from her station, winking at the camera, "am creating the Genovese of the future, indeed, of the present looking forward. Whole wheat shortbread with a touch of toasted almond flour. And pastry cream, yes, but enriched with Brant DOP pistachio paste and a light infusion of cardamom and candied ginger. A Sicilian heart that embraces the world." Her cream appeared pale green, inviting. About halfway through, a small drama was consumed at Severino Station. He had been distracted for a moment, checking the temperature of another preparation. A tray of shortbread shells in the oven darkened a bit too much. An almost imperceptible "damn" escaped his pursed lips. His forehead pearled with a thin veil of sweat. For a moment, his legendary self-control seemed to waver. Ludovica, who had noticed his stiffening with the corner of her eye, hesitated for a second. Then, contravening all competitive logic, she turned off her immersion blender. She crossed the small balustrade. "Chef, everything all right?" she asked quietly. Her usual breezy tone was muted by genuine concern. "Need a hand? I have extra shortbread if you want." Severino stared at her, caught completely off guard. Surprise prevented any cutting reply. He swallowed with difficulty. I shouldn't accept help from a competitor," he only managed to stammer, more to himself than to her. "But chef, we're not gladiators in the arena," Ludovica responded with a half-smile. "We're two people who love making desserts. Sometimes accidents happen, right?" That unexpected gesture, filmed from all angles, sent a wave of surprise and appreciation through the audience and jury. For the first time, a crack in the armor of the two enemies had been glimpsed. Severino, while courteously refusing help with a nod, seemed less rigid. A muscle in his face relaxed imperceptibly, almost touched. The 2 hours passed in a flash. At Ferretti's time, both stations displayed magnificent creations. Each was a faithful manifesto of its creator's philosophy. The jury began tasting with solemn concentration. The silence in the tent was dense. Comments, whispered between bites, were a mix of admiration and difficulty. "It's an arduous task," admitted one of the three-starred chefs, wiping his lips with a napkin. "Roussier's Genovese is a monument to purity. Every element is perfectly calibrated. A faithful echo of the noblest tradition, but with a lightness and finesse that elevate it. Esposito's is an intelligent explosion of creativity. The innovation isn't pretentious, but serves to enhance new nuances of the dessert without betraying its soul." Maria Grammatico, from her connection from Erice, concluded with her ancient wisdom. "A good Genovese must speak to the heart before the palate. It must tell the story of who made it and the land it comes from." Both seem to have grasped this spirit, each in their own way. After a long and animated deliberation, Marco Ferretti returned to the stage. He held the verdict sheet in his hand. "Ladies and gentlemen, the jury has reached a decision. A difficult decision, given the very high quality of both proposals. The winner of this extraordinary challenge is—" He created an artful pause. Severino and Ludovica's hearts accelerated. Their eyes met for a fleeting instant. Italian cuisine. Today you have demonstrated that the greatness of our gastronomy lies precisely in its ability to preserve tradition and at the same time to courageously embrace the future. The jury has therefore decided, quite exceptionally, to declare a tie. A thunderous ovation filled the tent. On Severino and Ludovica's faces, however, a complex expression was painted. There was a mix of disappointment for the lack of clear victory and undeniable relief for not having suffered a devastating defeat. It wasn't the ending they expected. The ambiguity of the result left many questions open. While cameras lingered on their close-ups, Giulia Martini discreetly made her way forward. "Chef Roussier, Ludovica," she addressed them with an encouraging smile. "This result only confirms my idea. The book. After today, it's even more necessary, more powerful. What would you say about deepening this research together? A real journey, not just a challenge. Erice, Sicily, the stories behind the recipes. It could be the beginning of something truly special." Severino and Ludovica looked at each other. The cutting frost of the first clashes had slightly thawed. It had been replaced by a cautious, mutual respect. But the road to true collaboration, or something more, still appeared long and strewn with unknowns. Chapter 4. Route to Erice between sighs and subtleties. "I still can't believe I agreed to this expedition," Severino muttered, more to himself than to Ludovica. He was arranging with his almost surgical meticulousness a rigid suitcase in the spacious trunk of his Audi A6 Avant. Anthracite gray, naturally. The journey to Erice, organized at breakneck speed by Giulia Martini and Ferretti's production team following the clamorous tie, was now an inescapable reality. Giulia had been peremptory. "If you want this book to have a soul, you must go to the roots, and you must go together. Your dynamic is the heart of the narrative." Ludovica arrived with a delay of 25 abundant minutes. She was a small tornado of energy, dragging a bright fuchsia suitcase that seemed about to explode. She also had a shoulder bag from which chargers, a mini tripod, and her inseparable leopard print water bottle protruded. "Sorry, I promise I was good, just one last story for my followers. I couldn't disappear into the cosmic void without warning my community, right?" she chirped. She seemed oblivious to the dirty look Severino shot her. "Naturally," he sighed. He closed the tailgate with a sharp thud that betrayed his lack of patience. 8 hours of driving. Are you ready for this ordeal, Miss Esposito? Ready for 8 hours locked in a car with you, Ice Prince. Not exactly a dream come true, let's say, but ready for an adventure discovering the most secret Sicily. Absolutely yes. Ludovica winked at him and slipped agilely into the passenger seat. She immediately began fiddling with cables and phone. The first kilometers on the Autostrada del Sol passed in tense silence. It was interrupted only by the velvety voice of some jazz singer chosen by Severino from his driving concentration playlist. He drove with his usual impeccable precision, his gaze fixed on the road, hands gripping the steering wheel with moderate force. Ludovica, after trying vainly to find a comfortable position, began scrolling through her social media. She commented quietly on stories from other famous cooks. Do you really feel the need to document every single breath of your existence? Severino interrupted her, without taking his eyes off the road. This was when she began filming a brief video of the highway landscape, complete with zoom on his concentrated profile. His tone was controlled, but the vein on his temple pulsed slightly. Darling, it's called content creation. It's my job, Ludovica replied. She lowered the phone, but not entirely her defiant gaze. My followers are my extended family. They want to know what I'm up to, where I go, what I eat. And this alleged family couldn't wait for your return to be informed of your miraculous exploits. No, Severino, I'm afraid not. The world, like it or not, works like this today, in real time. It's called authenticity, transparency, sharing. Transparency, Severino repeated with an intonation that was anything but neutral. Or perhaps digital exhibitionism, telling the most insignificant details of one's life to perfect strangers. Ludovica turned off the phone screen with a sharp gesture. She turned to look at him, this time seriously. And you, Severino, when was the last time you told someone something about yourself? Something truly yours, without it being a culinary mission statement or a technique lesson? The question caught him by surprise. It was like a false note in a perfect symphony. He was used to discoursing for hours about low-temperature cooking or the purity of primordial broth, but about himself, his frailties, his most intimate thoughts. A slight blush colored his cheeks, immediately masked by a cough. Personal matters, Miss Esposito, are and must remain such. Private. See, that's your problem, chef. You cook exactly like you live, everything under millimetric control, everything impeccable on the surface, everything kept at proper emotional distance. And you instead live like you cook, a continuous explosion, an excess of flavors, everything offered without filters, with the constant risk of resulting indigestible. The barb hit home. Ludovica pressed her lips together, but before she could reply, Severino pulled into an anonymous service area near Orvieto. A coffee, he announced laconically, getting out of the car, while they sipped two restricted espressos at the greasy bar counter. Amid the noise of the coffee machine and the chatter of other travelers, Ludovica, with a more measured tone, resumed the discourse. You know, before the famous challenge, I did some research, not just on your restaurant, but on your story. You started very early, right? You were almost a kid. Severino was surprised by that change of register. He stared at the dark cup. 16 years old, apprenticed to Paul Bocuse in Lyon, an experience that forges you in fire. It must have been hard. Formative, he corrected her. A fleeting shadow crossed his eyes. My father, a pragmatic Piedmontese engineer, would have preferred me to dedicate myself to more concrete studies. Cooking is a servant's trade, Severino. It won't give you prestige or security, he kept telling me. And your mother? Ludovica asked with a delicacy that caught him off guard. A longer pause, almost painful. He lowered his gaze to the cup, tracing its rim with a finger. My mother passed away when I was 14. She was the one. she who had transmitted to me the love for the stoves. She was of French origin, an extraordinary cook, though only a housewife. She said that cooking was her way of speaking to people's hearts without need for words. Ludovica remained silent for a moment. The confession, so unexpected, touched her. My grandmother Carmela also said something similar in her Neapolitan dialect. O cor è ad avere in to pieto guaglio. The heart must be seen in the dish. They got back in the car. The atmosphere had subtly changed. Severino's refined jazz continued to flow, but now there was a different awareness between them. After another couple of hours of driving, while the landscape became rougher and wilder crossing Basilicata, Ludovica dozed off. Her head was leaning against the window. Severino, casting her a quick glance, noticed how, without the armor of her perennial exuberance, her face appeared younger, almost vulnerable, an expression that contrasted with the image of the aggressive blogger who had attacked him. She woke with a start while they were crossing Calabria, with the sun now high. Oh God, where are we? Did I miss the best part of the trip? Just past Cosenza, Severino replied. A corner of his mouth almost bent into a smile. Would you like to take over driving for a while? Ludovica's eyes widened. You, proposing that I drive your precious German car. Who are you, and what have you done with the real Severino Roussier, the man who probably sanitizes the steering wheel after each use? Despite himself, Severino let slip a brief smile, immediately recomposed. I've reflected on what you said earlier. Perhaps, every now and then, a bit less control doesn't hurt. Ludovica took the wheel with an enthusiasm that almost worried him. Her driving style was the opposite of his, more instinctive, less formal, with frequent lane changes. The soundtrack quickly switched from jazz to decidedly more rhythmic Italian pop. For lunch, at her suggestion, they stopped at an anonymous trattoria along the state road. Da Zia Rita. Trust me, she had told him. Here we'll eat the best parmigiana of your life. The place was simple, almost Spartan. Faded checkered tablecloths and a handwritten menu on a small blackboard. Rita, a woman in her 60s, robust and with a smile that filled the room, welcomed Ludovica with the affection of a relative. Ludo, beautiful treasure, what are you doing around here? And who's this young man? New boyfriend. Zia Rai, he's Severino, a colleague. We're headed to Sicily for work. During lunch, Severino, initially skeptical, had to change his mind in front of a plate of spaghetti with fresh tomato and basil of disarming simplicity. He closed his eyes at the first bite, an expression of surprise painting his face. They are superlative, he admitted, almost reluctantly. There's no secret technique, my son, explained Zia Rita, bringing to the table an eggplant parmigiana of celestial appearance. Just good tomatoes, real ones, picked from the garden this morning, and lots of love. That must never be missing. See, Ludovica whispered to him, with a triumphant gleam in her eyes. Not everything has to be complicated to be exceptional. Severino remained thoughtful. The genuineness of that dish, its disarming honesty, had touched a chord he thought dormant, a memory of his mother's kitchen, so distant from his elaborate and intellectual creations. They waited for the ferry to Villa San Giovanni, with the sun beginning its fiery descent into the strait. They were both leaning against the railing, watching the sea ripple. I'm a bit scared, Ludovica suddenly confessed. Her voice was barely a whisper carried by the wind. Afraid of what? Severino asked, surprised by that vulnerability. Of all this, of Erice, of the book, of not being up to it, of discovering that in the end I'm just someone who makes cute videos with desserts and not a real artist like you. She lowered her gaze to her colorful sneakers. Severino turned to look at her. The wind tousled her hair, and the setting sun gilded her profile. Do you want to know what I thought after the challenge when you offered me your pastry dough? Ludovica looked at him, questioning, a mix of fear and hope in her eyes. I thought that maybe you were right. That perhaps, in my attempt to reach abstract perfection, my cuisine had lost a bit of its warmth, of its soul. The ferry docked, while the last slice of sun sank beyond the Sicilian horizon. During the final stretch toward the peak of Erice, wrapped in darkness and the intense scent of Mediterranean scrubland, they found themselves talking. For the first time, not as adversaries, but as colleagues, almost as confidants, about their fears, broken dreams, that totalizing passion for cooking that had led them down such different paths. My maternal grandmother, Concetta, was originally from Erice, Severino revealed, as the car struggled up the hairpin turns leading to the medieval village. I didn't know her well, she passed when I was still small, but my mother often told me about her recipes, especially her desserts. She said she had golden hands, and you never tried to recreate her Genovese. I'm convinced I have an old notebook of hers somewhere, at home, in Verbania. Handwritten recipes with that slightly uncertain handwriting of hers. I've never seriously opened it, to be honest, perhaps out of reverential fear. His voice had become more subdued. Erice finally appeared, suspended between sky and sea like a vision from an ancient postcard. A tangle of gray stone houses, dimly lit by street lamps. Cobblestone alleys that disappeared in shadow, and the imposing profile of the Norman castle watching over the valley below. Despite the late hour and travel fatigue, they instinctively decided to take a walk before reaching the small boutique hotel booked by Giulia. "It's magical," Ludovica whispered, wrapping herself in her shawl as the cool evening wind enveloped her. Her eyes sparkled, reflecting the distant lights of Trapani. "It's like being plunged into another time," Severino agreed. He felt an unusual peace descending within him, a loosening of the tension that had accompanied him for days. They turned into an alley. They were attracted by the sweet scent coming from a small pastry shop, miraculously still open. They bought a couple of freshly baked Genovese. They sat on a stone bench overlooking the spread of city lights and the distant salt pans, dark mirrors under the starry sky. "You know something, Severino," said Ludovica, after taking an ecstatic bite of the warm dessert. Cream stained a corner of her mouth, and she wiped it with a childish gesture. "Maybe this trip won't be such a terrible idea as I thought." "Perhaps you're right, Miss Esposito," Severino replied, and the sound of his own tone, so unusually soft, surprised them both. For the first time since Genovese's gate had set them against each other, they seemed to vibrate, if not on the same wavelength, at least on compatible frequencies. The scent of history and ancient desserts was beginning to weave its magic. Chapter 5. The rediscovered fragrance of memories. The fresh and pungent air of Erice pinched Severino's face when, at the first light of dawn, he left the muffled quiet of his lodging. Ludovica was still sleeping. He felt the need to explore the village in solitude, to absorb its essence before the frenzy of the television crew and book commitments took over. The paved streets, still damp with dew, were almost deserted. Only the sound of his footsteps and the distant cooing of pigeons broke the ancestral silence. He felt strangely serene. That place seemed to have the power to peel away the layers of rigid professionalism he had built around himself. He was attracted, almost magnetically, by a subtle but persistent scent. The smell of melted butter, vanilla, and citrus spreading from a half-open door in a secluded alley. A simple ceramic sign read, "Rosalia's Artisanal Pastry Shop, Typical Erice Sweets." Driven by professional curiosity and an echo of something familiar in that fragrance, Severino entered. The interior was small, welcoming. It was saturated with the sweet and comforting aroma of freshly baked desserts. Rough wooden shelves displayed muscatzali, almond cookies, and naturally, trays full of Genovese with golden domes dusted with powdered sugar. Behind an ancient marble counter, a woman in her 70s, with white hair gathered in a severe chignon, but with two lively and penetrating eyes like obsidian shards, was carefully arranging marzipan morsels. "Good morning, sir. What can I do for you?" asked the woman. Her voice was hoarse but kind, with a Sicilian cadence that sounded strangely melodious to Severino. "Good morning to you," Severino replied. He felt momentarily intimidated by that almost hieratic figure. My name is Severino Roussier. I'm doing research for a book on Erice Genovese. I was told that your pastry shop is one of the few custodians of the ancient traditional recipe." Rosalia looked him up and down, without haste. An eyebrow was slightly arched. "Roussier, you're not from these parts, I can hear from your accent. French, perhaps, or from the north. Piedmontese, to be precise. But my maternal roots go deep here in Sicily. My grandmother, Concetta Russo, was from Erice." Rosalia's face, until a moment before inscrutable, opened in a smile that illuminated her dark eyes. It was a flash of recognition, of surprise. "Concetta Russo, really, Concertina, Don Michel's daughter, the one who married the Piedmontese soldier many years ago." Severino was caught off guard by that explosion of familiarity. His heart skipped a small beat. Yes, that was her. "My grandmother. But then you are Pietrino, the grandson Concetta always talked about in her letters before the letters stopped coming." Rosalia came out from behind the counter with surprising agility for her age. And before Severino could react, she squeezed him in a vigorous hug scented with toasted almonds. "My son, you look just like your grandfather Pietro, peace to his soul. The nose, the eyes, and that slightly serious air." Rosalia's embrace was warm, sincere. Severino, caught off guard, remained rigid only for an instant. Then something inside him yielded. He felt an unexpected warmth spread in his chest, an ancient emotion that tightened his throat. He briefly looked away, an almost imperceptible gesture to hide an unusual gleam in his eyes. That frank affection, so distant from his controlled daily life, had touched him deeply. How did you know my grandmother?" he managed to ask, his voice slightly cracked. "How did I know her? We were like sisters, Pietrino. We grew up together in the convent of San Carlo, here in Erice, before she took her path and went north. She was the best of all of us at making desserts. She had a magic touch. The Genovese recipe I still use today, the real one. She taught it to me, with all her little secrets." Severino let himself be guided to a wrought-iron table. He felt a whirlwind of contrasting emotions. I have an old recipe notebook of hers, at home. I've never really consulted it with attention, I confess. That notebook is a treasure, my boy. You must find it, you must read it. Concetta had her variations, her tricks of the trade that she revealed to no one, or almost. She always said that every dessert should have a soul. At that precise moment, Ludovica's energetic figure appeared on the pastry shop's threshold, a ray of morning sun. "Severino, but what are you doing already up and operational? Did you get lost among the alleys?" Then she noticed Rosalia and the almost intimate scene. "Oh, sorry, did I interrupt something?" "Ludovica, please come in," said Severino, quickly recomposing himself. "This is Mrs. Rosalia. She was a dear friend of my grandmother Concetta." Ludovica, with her innate ability to grasp emotional nuances, immediately understood she was witnessing a significant moment. She approached with a sweet smile. "Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Rosalia. Severino has told me so much about this place and his roots." Rosalia observed them both. Her keen eyes seemed to read beyond appearances. "You two are writing a book together, I heard in the village." "Yes, we're collaborating on a project about Genovese," Ludovica replied, with a complicit glance at Severino. Good, Rosalia nodded. "Then you absolutely must come back later, when the morning's heavy work is done. I'll show you how we made Genovese once, the ones Concetta and I made. The ones that tasted of home and heart." They spent the morning exploring Erice. For Severino, every stone, every glimpse, now seemed to resonate with new meaning. The discovery of Rosalia's connection to his grandmother had opened an unexpected breach in his past, a golden thread that reconnected him to a part of himself he had always kept at distance. He seemed more relaxed, almost lighter. Even Ludovica noticed the change. "It's incredible to think about all this," said Severino, as they looked out from the walls of Venus Castle. The expanse of sea and salt pans stretched to the horizon. "My grandmother left this place when she was still a girl, but her essence remained here, among these stones, in these scents. And now, somehow, I've come back to look for her. Something similar happens to me when I return to my grandparents' village, in Silento," Ludovica confided. "I'm Neapolitan to the core, raised in the city's colorful chaos. But it's in those smaller, simpler places that you rediscover your truest roots, the ones that tell you who you really are, beyond everything else." That afternoon, the small kitchen behind Rosalia's pastry shop became their sanctuary. It was an ancient environment, with a large wood-fired oven long extinguished, but still imposing. There were marble tables worn by use, and a persistent scent of yeast, butter, and almonds that seemed to impregnate the walls themselves. Rosalia had already prepared all the ingredients: sifted flour, fresh eggs, artisanal butter, finest sugar, fragrant Sicilian lemons. "Before we start with our hands in the dough," said Rosalia with a sly smile, "I want Severino to call his mother. He must tell her that her Pietrino is here, in Erice, and that he's found an old friend of Concetta." Severino hesitated. His relationships with his mother, after his father's death, had become more formal, almost distant. But he felt this was an important moment. He took the phone and dialed the number. The joy and emotion in his mother's voice, when Rosalia spoke to her with that affectionate tone full of memories, were palpable even for Ludovica, who observed the scene discreetly. A smile curved her lips. "Mom said she'll look for Grandma Concetta's notebook right away," Severino announced, hanging up. His eyes were moist. "She promised to find it and send it by express courier. It should arrive tomorrow, or the day after at the latest." "Excellent," exclaimed Rosalia, clapping her hands. "Then, while we wait for Concetta's precious papers, let's start with the basics. Mine, which were also a bit hers." With infinite patience and ancient gestures, Rosalia showed them every step. The preparation of shortbread, which must be worked little with love but without too many caresses, otherwise it heats up and loses its grace. The pastry cream, smooth as silk, fragrant but not invasive, because the dessert must be a balance of flavors, like life. But what made that lesson truly special were the stories Rosalia wove into the gestures. "Your grandmother, Severino," she told while sifting powdered sugar, "was a girl full of talent, but also with a veil of melancholy in her eyes. She had left here in Erice a youthful love, a good boy from the village, a fisherman. When she then married your grandfather, the soldier from the north, it was more a choice of family convenience, of security, than a true impulse of the heart. But she didn't lose heart. She brought with her to the north the love for her land and for cooking, and she transformed it into her art, into her way of giving affection." Severino listened in silence, absorbing every word. His face was a mask, but his eyes betrayed a storm of emotions. He had never known anything about this story, this lost love. His mother had always been very reserved about his grandmother's past. "And now you too," Rosalia continued, with a sharp glance that passed from Severino to Ludovica, "with your such different stories, have brought that love, that passion for roots back here, where it all began." While they worked side by side in the kitchen's narrow space, passing ingredients, correcting each other with a new delicateness, something tangible began to change between Severino and Ludovica. There was no longer the tension of challenge. There was a sort of nascent complicity, the awareness of sharing an authentic and profound experience. It seemed almost natural. Ludovica has an exceptional intuition for combinations, a modern palate, Rosalia commented at a certain point, observing them. And Severino possesses impeccable technique, an almost religious respect for the material. Together, if only they wanted, they would make a complete chef, capable of amazing the world. When the first Genovese, those prepared scrupulously following Rosalia's indications, came out of the oven, emanating a celestial fragrance, they all sat in the small inner courtyard of the pastry shop. It was flooded with the golden light of the late afternoon in Erice. There, different, Ludovica murmured after the first taste. She closed her eyes to concentrate on the flavor. They have something more. Authentic, I don't know how to explain it. They're made with intention, my child, Rosalia explained, with a wise smile. With respect for those who taught us, but also with hope for those who look to the future. Every dessert, if made with the heart, tells the story of who creates it. I'm happy we came here, Ludovica said quietly, directed more at Severino than at Rosalia. Me too, Severino admitted. His usual rigidity seemed to have melted in the warmth of that afternoon. I never would have imagined that. What? She encouraged him with a small smile. That there was so much to discover about my family, and perhaps also a bit about me. Ludovica looked at him with a new tenderness. You know, when I first saw your restaurant, I thought you were incredibly talented, but also terribly cold, distant. But now, he pressed her, his voice barely a whisper, almost fearing the answer. Now I think you're just very well protected. Perhaps a bit like me in my way behind all my exuberance. That evening, back at their hotel, a courier knocked on Severino's room door. It was an urgent package from Verbania. With slightly trembling hands, Severino opened it. Inside, carefully wrapped, was an old notebook with a worn cover, bound in dark leather. He opened it. The yellowed pages were dense with his grandmother Concetta's elegant but slightly uncertain handwriting. There weren't just recipes. There were also scattered notes, reflections, even some small drawings of almond blossoms. One page, in particular, almost at the end of the notebook, caught his attention. It was written with slightly different, more decisive ink. To my beloved grandson Pietro, I hope one day you'll read these poor words of mine. Always remember, my child, that cuisine is the heart's most sincere language. Never forget the importance of tradition, of the roots that nourish us and give us strength. But also remember that every generation has the duty to add its own touch, its own heart, to what it has received. The future of our art is not in sterile preservation of the past, nor in the mad race toward a new that forgets where it comes from. It's in the harmonious meeting of old and new, in different hands that know how to work together, respecting and learning from each other. With all the love of your grandmother, Concetta. Severino, read and reread those words. He felt a knot tighten in his throat. He raised his gaze and handed the open notebook to Ludovica, who had entered silently into the room, attracted by his stillness. Read here, he simply said, his voice hoarse. Ludovica read. An expression of deep emotion crossed her face. Her eyes misted. It seems your grandmother already knew everything, Severino. Knew what? That despite our differences, despite everything, maybe. Maybe you were right to say that tradition is important, and maybe I was right to say that innovation is necessary. But above all, she added, and her eyes met his with a new, intense awareness, maybe the real secret is finding someone to share the recipe with. For the first time since they had clashed over that damn dessert, they looked at each other with a deep, almost intimate understanding. Competition, hostility, seemed to have vanished. They had been replaced by something fragile and precious that neither dared yet to name. True collaboration, dictated not by an editorial contract but by common feeling, was about to begin. and the scent of Genovese, that of memories and promises, seemed to envelop them both. Chapter 6. The Genovese of Reconciliation, Symphony for Four Hands. The 3 weeks following their trip to Erice passed in a whirlwind of feverish activity, but pervaded by a new, surprising harmony. Severino and Ludovica, though returned to their respective rhythms and restaurants, he in the disciplined elegance of L'essenza, she in the creative and welcoming chaos of her Neapolitan apartment transformed into a permanent studio, were linked by an invisible thread. They exchanged almost daily messages, photos of culinary experiments, doubts about consistencies and temperatures, fragments of ideas for the book that, under the discreet but tenacious guidance of Giulia Martini, was taking an increasingly defined and personal form. "I tried your grandmother Concetta's basic shortbread recipe," Ludovica wrote one day, attaching a photo of Genovese with somewhat rustic but inviting shapes. "But I couldn't resist. I added a veil of candied orange zest to the dough and a touch of dry marsala to the cream. I think Concetta would have approved of my little heresy. They are divine. I dared to try your Genovese del Vesuvio," Severino replied shortly after, with an image of desserts with an impeccable dome, but with an unusual pale green color. "I must admit with some reluctance that the pistachio-lime combination in the cream, if well balanced, has its provocative logic. It works." "It works" from Severino Roussier was equivalent to lavish praise from anyone else. Ludovica smiled at the phone. Giulia Martini, during their tripartite video calls, didn't fail to notice the change. "There's more heart in your texts, guys," she told them one afternoon, after reading the drafts of the book's first chapters. "The connection between you, the real one, is emerging between the lines. And it shows, it really shows. The public will love it. But the real turning point, the one that would impress an unexpected direction on their journey, came with an agitated phone call from Erice. It was Rosalia. "Pietrino, Ludovica, dear, I hope I'm not disturbing, but here we have a big problem." The elderly pastry chef's voice was cracked with worry. She explained that the municipality of Erice, as part of a controversial urban redevelopment plan, had approved the demolition of 3 ancient buildings in the heart of the village to make room for a modern multi-story parking garage. One of those buildings, which had housed her historic pastry shop for over 60 years, was included in the list. "After a lifetime spent between these walls, after having guarded the secrets of Concetta and the other masters, they want to close me down, tear everything down to make room for cars. But this is our history, our soul," she concluded, her voice broken by a barely contained sob. Severino and Ludovica exchanged a glance through their computer screens. Without need for a single word, a silent and immediate understanding formed between them. The injustice of that situation, the threat to such a precious heritage of flavors and memories, touched them deeply. A sense of anger arose in both. "Mrs. Rosalia," said Severino, with a firmness that surprised even Ludovica, "don't despair. Give us a week, we'll think of something. We won't let this happen." His jaw was set, his gaze determined. That very evening it was Ludovica who called Severino. Her voice vibrated with combative energy. "I have an idea, chef. Maybe a bit crazy, but brilliant in my opinion. Why don't we organize a big fundraising event right in Erice? A gala dinner, a charity auction. Something that makes noise, that mobilizes public opinion, and above all, that raises enough funds to convince the municipality to reconsider its plans, or to help Rosalia find an alternative." Severino was initially skeptical. An event of such scope in Erice, with so little notice, who would come? "Leave the noise part to me," Ludovica replied with confidence. "I have a network of contacts in the world of social media, influencers, journalist friends. And you, Severino, have access to a world of refined clients, renowned chefs, personalities who matter. Together, we could really make waves. And if we then convince Giulia and Marco Ferretti to help us with media coverage. It's madness, Severino murmured, but a flash of excitement, an almost forgotten spark of constructive challenge, lit up in his eyes. A madness big enough to work. A week later, Erice was in ferment. Severino and Ludovica, with the help of a small but scrappy team of collaborators, including faithful Paolo and Ludovica's hyperactive assistant, had put together an ambitious plan. The event was christened the Genovese of Reconciliation, a name that, as Giulia Martini pointed out in a press release, beautifully captures both the personal journey of the two chef protagonists and the urgency of reconciling progress with the preservation of the most precious traditions. This isn't just about saving a pastry shop. Friends, Ludovica proclaimed in a series of social media stories that went viral, filmed among Erice's alleys. Her passion was contagious. It's about defending a piece of our culture, a history of flavors and knowledge that risks disappearing forever under concrete. Severino, for his part, had activated his network of contacts in the world of haute cuisine and gastronomic collecting. This isn't a simple social event, he explained on the phone to multi-starred chefs and wealthy patrons of L'Essenza. His voice was calm but charged with urgency. It's an opportunity to testify to our commitment to those who preserve authenticity. It's a historic moment for Italian gastronomy. On the day of the event, Erice's main square, usually quiet and sleepy, was transformed into an elegant open-air salon. Tables impeccably set, garlands of lights intertwining among the ancient stone palaces, and an intoxicating scent of extraordinary food spreading in the cool evening air. The guest list was astounding. Chefs from Milan, Rome, even some names from Paris and London. Gastronomic critics, journalists from the most important publications, renowned influencers, and many simple enthusiasts who had generously responded to the appeal. But the real protagonist of the evening was Erice itself, with its austere beauty and millennial history. Severino and Ludovica had designed a menu with 4 hands. It was a true story of their journey. Classic dishes from Sicilian and Piedmontese tradition, reinterpreted with Severino's masterful technique and presented with Ludovica's creative flair and contemporary touch. "Welcome," Severino began, addressing the crowd. His confidence and warmth in his voice were new to many. "Welcome to an evening that wants to celebrate not what divides us in cuisine, but what profoundly unites us. Passion for excellence, respect for history, and the burning desire to preserve the beauty that has been handed down to us." Ludovica, at his side, radiant in a coral-colored dress that contrasted splendidly with Erice's gray stones, added with her usual verve. "Tonight, friends, every single dish you'll taste has a story to tell. And the most important story, the one that brought us here, is that of this magical place, and of a small, great pastry shop that for over 60 years has been the beating heart of Erice, thanks to the passion of an extraordinary woman, our Rosalia." A thunderous applause greeted Rosalia. She was seated at a place of honor, her eyes moist with emotion, her face furrowed by a trembling smile. The evening's climax was the presentation of the Genovese of Reconciliation. It was their joint creation, the dessert symbol of their journey. It had the classic, impeccable shape of the Erice Genovese, but it concealed subtle, ingenious innovations within. An almost imperceptible hint of candied bergamot in the pastry cream, which enhanced its freshness. A shortbread whose perfect consistency was the result of a modern butterworking technique developed by Severino. And an elegant but not pretentious presentation, with a dusting of Brant pistachio granules and a single, delicate, edible flower. As guests tasted the dessert, an almost reverential silence fell over the square. Then, Chef Marco Rinaldi, an institution of Italian cuisine with 3 Michelin stars and a reputation as an implacable critic, stood up. He lightly tapped his spoon on the glass to ask for attention. I have had the privilege of tasting countless interpretations of the Genovese in my long career, he declared. His authoritative voice resonated in the square. But this creation has something profoundly special. Its tradition embracing innovation without fear, without denaturing itself. It's the past dialoguing with the present, pointing the way to the future. It is, in a word, pure emotion. The emotion became palpable. Even Maria Grammatico, connected via video from an event in Palermo, allowed herself an enthusiastic comment. She called it a truly exceptional dessert, a tribute to our roots that looks with intelligence and heart to tomorrow. When, late at night, the result of the fundraising was announced, the figure far exceeded every rosiest expectation. Not only was Rosalia's pastry shop saved, there would be sufficient funds to create a small foundation for the protection of Erice's historic sweets. The municipality, faced with such popular mobilization and national media attention, publicly announced the revision of the urban plan and the commitment to enhance the threatened historic buildings. "We did it," Ludovica whispered to Severino as the crowd exulted. Her eyes were moist with joy and fatigue. She felt his arm lightly squeezing her shoulder. "No, Ludovica," he corrected her, with a half-smile that illuminated his usually stern face. He gently took her hand, a gesture that now seemed natural, almost instinctive. "We did it together." As the last guest said goodbye and the lights began to dim, Giulia Martini approached the two chefs. A satisfied expression painted her face. "The book is almost ready for print," she said, "but I think your story deserves an even more surprising final chapter. I've heard some voices, some ideas floating in the air tonight. What would you say about transforming this incredible synergy into something more permanent? A restaurant, perhaps?" Severino and Ludovica exchanged an intense look, one of those that need no words. The idea, crazy and wonderful, had begun to serpentine through their private conversations for some weeks. A dream whispered almost fearfully. "To tell the truth, Giulia," Ludovica replied, with a radiant smile that was all a program. "We had already talked about it. And where do you think of realizing this?" "Magic," the editor asked, already imagining the title of the new chapter. "Here," Severino replied. His gaze embraced Erice's square, the castle's profile outlined against the starry sky, and finally settled on Ludovica with a tenderness that made her blush. "Or perhaps not exactly here, but we want to create a place that honors what we've learned and discovered together. A place suspended between tradition and innovation, between rigor and passion. The restaurant would be called Anima and Technica, a name that merged the essence of Ludovica's cuisine, her instinctive and heartfelt approach, with Severino's mastery and scientific precision. 6 months later, Anima and Technica opened its doors in a splendid renovated farmhouse in the hills of Monferrato. Not far from Verbania, but close enough to Milan to attract an international clientele. A special partnership with Rosalia's renovated pastry shop in Erice ensured that authentic Erice Genovese were always present on the dessert menu, alongside the innovative creations born from the two chefs' collaboration. The book, titled The Genovese of Reconciliation, Recipes and Stories of an Unexpected Encounter, became a bestseller. It was praised not only as a superb recipe collection, but as a touching love story, for food, for culture, and subtly for souls who had found and recognized each other through the art of cooking. The opening night of Anima and Technica was a memorable event. Friends from the television challenge, the publishing world, Ludovica's vast community, and the most loyal customers of L'Essenza all came together to celebrate that new beginning. As service was winding down, Severino found Ludovica on the restaurant's panoramic terrace. She was immersed in contemplating the starry sky. "Tired?" he asked, gently encircling her shoulders. Her scent, a mix of vanilla and citrus, enveloped him. "Happy," she replied, leaning into him. Her body fitted perfectly against his. Who would have ever said, that it would all start with a scathing review and a contested dessert? Sometimes the best things are born from the most heated contrasts, Severino murmured, holding her a bit tighter. He felt the beat of her heart against his back. "And we must admit, make a formidable team. In the kitchen and beyond," Ludovica added, raising her face toward his. Her eyes sparkled brighter than the stars. He nodded, and the kiss that followed was as sweet and intense as the cream of their Genovese. A perfect seal to a story that had transformed acrimony into respect, competition into collaboration, and two apparently irreconcilable philosophies into a unique and unrepeatable recipe for love. As the first lights of dawn began to tinge the horizon, Severino and Ludovica remained embraced. They were surrounded by the scent of their success and the promise of a future to be written together, one dish at a time. The most delicious recipe, the one for happiness, they had just created together. You have listened to a Genovese for Four Hands, a Pseudobiblia narration. We hope you enjoyed this journey. Remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel for a new audiobook every Friday at 9 p.m. and to explore our playlists for other genres. Thanks for listening. This work is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and events are the product of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, events, or places, living or dead, is entirely coincidental.